Okay, today's daf is Kuv Daled. It's going to be, the first half of it is a fascinating discussion, agadic discussion of the letters of the Hebrew alphabet. So we're going to just finish off the little piece that we left with yesterday, which is 11 lines down where it says Gufa. Amar Rav Chisda said, Mem v'samech shabaluchot banes hayu omedin. That the mem and samech, it's talking about the mem sofit, the final mem, which is totally round, and the samech, banes hayu omedin, means that they stood by a miracle in the luchot, in the tablets of Moshe, because since the letters penetrated all the way through, it says Mishneh Evrehen, that it could be seen, Mishneh Evrehen, that it could be seen on both sides. So then, therefore, the little piece in the middle of the mem, it's going to fall, it's going to float in midair. The little piece in the middle of the samech, since it's totally circular, is going to have to float as well. So therefore it's miraculously suspended in midair. Rav Chisda says, Ketav shebaluchot, the writing in the tablets of Moses, nikra mibifnim, v'nikra mibachutz. You could read it standing facing the luchot, and you could read it from behind. Of course, if you read it from behind, it didn't say exactly the same thing. What did it say if you read it from behind? It says Kegon nevuv buvan. Because if you read something from the back, obviously the order of the letters is reversed from if you're reading it. So it's not that it was so miraculous that not only could you read it from both sides, but you read exactly the same thing on both sides. No, it's still, you're standing behind the luchot, so you're going to see the backwards, so you're going to see it backwards. But same letters. And saru, varas. If it said saru, it would say varas. What?
But then the nun safit turns to regular nun. You say that the nun safit is anyway not so important.
What about the nun safit?
Didn't we talk about it yesterday?
Yeah.
It's not so important. So here, if you're reading it, what would have been in the original? There was no such thing as a nun safit in those days?
No, it would have been. So it would have you would have seen a nun sofit, I guess. You would have seen the regular nun, but you would have seen it at the end of the word, because it would have reversed it.
Later addition.
What? No, here it's nevuv. He's using as an example two words that are not even really on the luchot. He's just using an example. So if it were nun bet vav bet, the word, and you read it from behind, you would see the reverse of that, bet vav bet nun, but you wouldn't see a nun sofit. You would see a regular nun.
What's interesting that? Any writing.
I guess because since it's a miracle already, perhaps you would think that when it says you saw it from both sides, you saw the exact same thing, meaning you would see it in the right order, no matter which way you faced. So he's saying it wasn't that miraculous. I guess it was miraculous enough that there was a piece floating in there. You didn't need the fact that also from the back it would look exactly the same as the front. That miraculous it wasn't, apparently. So now the Gemara says, Amrei le Rabbanan Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi. This is a very, very interesting piece of Gemara, which, by the way, has many halachic implications. So you might think it's just a regular Agadah, and in many respects it is. It's an unusual Agadah, because it's not a story. Although it opens with a story, but there are a lot of halachic implications of it in terms of how the letters are written. So we're going to see. So the rabbi said to Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi, Atu dardekei ha'idana lebei midrasha. That there were some young students who came today to the Beit Midrash, to the house of study. Va'amru milei da afilu b'mei Yoshua ben Nun lo itmar kevatayu. That even in the days of Yoshua ben Nun, nothing was said like this. In other words, they had some major novelty to what they had to say, some amazing chidushim here, some new insights. What were they? Aleph Bet. First we're going to go through the Aleph Bet, the entire alphabet in order, and see the symbolic significance of the order of the letters. So Aleph Bet means Aleph Bina, learn wisdom, because Yalif in Aramaic it means to learn. Ulpan is a word that comes from that same root, to learn. So Aleph Bina means learn wisdom or learn understanding. So when we say Aleph and Bet, that's the symbolic meaning. Gimel Dalet, what does Gimel Dalet stand for? Gimol Dalim. Gimol is be kind. Dalim are poor people or people who are less fortunate. So Gimol Dalim. Gimel Dalet is Gimol Dalim. Why is it that the leg of the gimel is stretching out a little bit towards the letter after it? If you were to see the alphabet, it looks like the gimel its foot is moving towards the dalet. Sheken darko shel gomel chasadim larutz achar dalim, because the gomel chesed, the person who wants to do kindness, runs after the poor person. He seeks an opportunity to. Apparently they didn't know about the mishulachim that we have today. Apparently they didn't know about the mishulachim that we have today. They run after us. And why is it that the Daled is its leg is curved a little bit back towards the gimel. What's the reason for that? He should make himself available. In other words, if you want to do kindness for somebody who's less fortunate, they shouldn't run away. They should allow you to do it. Why is it that if you look at a dalet, if you put a gimel and a dalet, so the back of the dalet is facing the gimel, not the face of the dalet, not the open part of the dalet, but the back. Why is that? Because we want to give somebody something not right face to face. The gimel is facing the back of the dalet. The dalet is the poor person, because you don't want to give something right to somebody's face, because then they feel embarrassed in front of you. They feel ashamed that you helped them. This way you do it with them. Their back is facing you, and that way they feel more pride, and they don't have to feel embarrassed. Hey Vav, what's Hey Vav? Zeh Shemo Shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu. This is one of the names of Hashem, but we say Ani Vahu Hoshiana, right? Like on Sukkot. So that's the name of Hashem. Zach T Kal. So what does that stand for? Zayin Chet, and we have Tet Yud Kaf Lamed. So what do all of them stand for? Ve'imata oseken. If you do this, in other words, you're Gomel Dalim, right? You help those who are poor. Then Hashem is going to do this for you, because Hey Vav stands for Hashem, and then these letters stand for what He's going to do for you. What's He going to do for you? Hakadosh Baruch Hu Zanotcha. That's Zayin. He's going to support you. V'chanotcha. He's going to be gracious to you. Umetiv lecha. He's going to be kind to you. That's the tet. V'noten lecha yerusha. He's going to give you an inheritance. That's the yud. V'kosher lecha keter. He's going to make you a crown le'olam haba, for eternity, for the next world. So we're already up to lamed. We got a lot of the letters. We're more than halfway through. Mem petucha mem setuma. We have the open mem and the closed mem. That's because ma'amar patuach, ma'amar satum. Some things you should openly talk about, and some things you should be quiet about. In other words, there are some areas of the Torah that are open. They're revealed Torah. Some of them are like Maaseh Merkavah, the secrets of the Torah. You keep them closed. Nun kifufa, nun pishuta. Why do you have a bent nun, by which they mean the regular nun, and the nun pishuta is talking about the final nun? So ne'eman kafuf, ne'eman pashut. A person who's trustworthy and honest and good, and kafuf, he's humble, will be a ne'eman pashut, will be straightened out in the next world. Not straightened out in a bad way, meaning corrected, but straightened out meaning pride. He'll have the pride for his full reward in the next world. So in this world he's very humble and he makes little of himself, but he'll be rewarded and be held up on a pedestal, so to speak, in the world to come. So that's the nun, the bent nun and the straight nun. Samech ayin. What is samech ayin? Semoch aniyim. Support the poor. Okay, so there's a lot of ideas about tzedakah here. But there's another interpretation, lishana acharina, another language, simanim aseh b'torah, ukneota. Make simanim, make mnemonics for the Torah so you can acquire it. What kind of simanim do you have? You have all the different ways that they would use. For example, sometimes in the Gemara, Rashi mentions they'll have in the Shas, in the Talmud, sometimes they'll have a list of words that by themselves the words don't mean anything, but actually they're a mnemonic for remembering the flow of the discussion afterwards, as we've seen many times. That's an example, or when we talk about the Torah reading, right? There's a Torah reading for Pesach. We have the mnemonic to remember that. We have the mnemonic like Meshach B'Torah. Kadesh B'Chaspa and all that, to remember those things. But then even to remember the list, let's say there's going to be a long discussion with different statements by different rabbis that don't directly connect to one another. They could be Agadah or they could be Halacha. But there will be before that some kind of list of, let's say, 5 or 10 words that will remind you of what the ensuing discussion, what the order of the ensuing discussion is going to be. That's Simanim. And that's where the tikkun of simanim, that's one of the places where they got the name simanim, because it gives you lots of hints to remember the proper reading of the Torah in different places. So that's another interpretation of samech ayin, that simanim aseh. Then you have pe kefufa pe peshuta, you have the curved pe and the long pe, the final version and the regular version. So pe patuach pe satum. Sometimes you should open your mouth, sometimes you should close your mouth. In other words, there are some things that you should say and some things you shouldn't say. This isn't talking about areas of Torah, some that you should discuss openly and some that should be secret. It's just saying in general, there are some things you should say and some things that are Lashon Hara that you shouldn't say. Then we have tzadi kifufa tzadi pishuta. You have the tzadi that is the regular one, and you have the one that is the long one. So for the end of the word. So that again, tzaddik kafuf, tzaddik pashut. That means that a tzaddik who is humble in this world will be proud in the next world, so to speak. So what does that mean? So wait a second. Hainu ne'eman kafuf ne'eman pashut. You told me before already that the ne'eman kafuf, the righteous person who is bent, who is humble, in the next world will receive lots of reward. So why are you telling me it again with tzadi? It's the same thing. So it says hosif lecha katuv kafifal kafifato. It's telling you an even further level of humility. Tzaddik is even more. Ne'eman is one level. Tzaddik is even more, an even higher level of humility and development. Which teaches you that the Torah was given with a shaking of the head, by which it means not shaking of the head like when you're listening to music, shaking of the head like beratit. He says with fear and with anava, with great humility. In other words, the person who really receives the Torah receives it with great shaking and reverence. And a person who receives it with great reverence and great humility is the person who really achieves heights of righteousness. So the more humility, the better, is basically what the Gemara is telling us.
Why does it bother him here, the repetition? It doesn't bother him with dull and poor people twice.
That's a good question. That's a very good question. That does sound like the same thing twice. Very good question. I'm not sure. It does sound like the same thing. I guess you could try to understand Gomel Dalim maybe is doing an act of chesed for somebody, as opposed to Simoch Aniyim, which has to do with supporting them. It sounds more systemic. It sounds like more of having some kind of a constant source of support, as opposed to just a one-time gift or assistance that you're giving. But it's a good question. That's just off the top of my head a possible explanation. So now Kuf, what's Kuf? Kadosh, holy. That's talking about Hashem. What is Resh? Rasha. So they have Kadosh and Rasha right next to each other. Mai ta'ama me'ader aped dekuf meresh. Why is it that the Kuf and the Resh don't face each other? And really, it's not that the Kuf faces away from the Resh, it's really that the Resh faces away from the Kuf, because the front of the Resh is to the left. Right? If you put a Kuf and a Resh next to each other, the Resh is facing away. That's what Rashi says it meens. So what that means is, Amaraka, so it says that the reason is Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu, because the Holy One, blessed be He, says, En ani yachol listakel barasha. I don't want to look at the wicked person. So therefore the Rasha faces away from the Holy One, so that the Holy doesn't have to see the wicked. Umay ta'ama mehader taged dekuf legabe resh. But why is it that nonetheless, if you look at the tag, if you look at the crown on the kuf, there's a little crown on it facing the resh. Why does it face the resh? Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu, because Hashem says, Im chozer bo ani koshelo keter kamoti. Then if he decides to do teshuvah, I'll let him be like me. I'll give him a crown. So even though Hashem doesn't want to look at the face of the Rasha, so to speak, right now he doesn't want to look at him, but he offers him the opportunity to do teshuvah and says, I'm going to give you a crown if you do so. Umay ta'amam, what's the reason? Kar'e dekuf tiluya, that you have the kuf broken. The leg of the kuf is not attached to the roof of the kuf. So it's open facing the resh, right? If you have a kuf and a resh, the opening is facing the resh. Why is that? So again, the reason is, this supports, this is to teach us the following idea. That if the Raja wants to come back, he doesn't have to go all the way around the kuf to get in. He can go straight in because there's a hole in the side of the kuf. So although the kuf and resh, the resh faces away from the kuf because they don't want to face each other, because Hashem doesn't want to see the wicked person, so to speak, still there's an opening in the side of the kuf facing the resh, so the resh can go right directly in, no problem. And this is Misayeh Aleh Resh Lakish. This supports the view of Resh Lakish. The Amar Resh Lakish Mai Dechtiv, because Resh Lakish says, what does the pasuk mean? Im la letzim hu yalitz v'la anavim yitenchen. What does it mean when the pasuk says, with those who are letzim, with those who are mockers, scorners, he deals harshly. V'la anavim, and to the humble people yitenchen, that he gives grace to those people. So he says that he scorns those who scorn and he gives grace to those who are humble. So, bal tameh potchimlo. What it means is, for the letzim, he deals, for the scorners, he deals like a scorner. Meaning, if somebody wants to do bad, he opens it for them. Potchimlo. Bal letaher. On the other hand, if a person comes to purify themselves, then we help them, okay? So Hashem is going to help them. So it doesn't say He helps the wicked person do bad. It says potchin lo, He allows him to do bad. In other words, He gives them the ability to do bad. He doesn't stop him. But if a person comes to be purified, then He gives him si'ua, He gives him assistance, and this is exactly why the kuf is open on the side. So if the Rasha wants to return, he can return right away to Kedusha, to holiness. Shin, sheker. Shin stands for sheker, falsehood. Tav, emet. But the tav stands for truth. So my tama sheker mikarvan milei, emet mirachaka milei. Why is it that if you want to find the letters emet, you have to go all the way across the aleph bet? You have to have aleph is the first letter, mem is in the middle, tav is at the end. Sheker, it's all next to each other. Right? You have the kuf, resh, and shin, they're all right there. So why is that? So it says the reason is because shikra shachiach, because falsehood, you can find it anywhere. It's all over. It's easy to find. Kushta lo shachiach. But it's hard to find truth. Truth, you have to dig and find it. It's much more difficult.
That's funny. I mean, I would see that as something that's like sheker is always out of context. Sheker, like you can make a lie live when it's out of context. Whereas emet, it
connects to everything.
You have to look at the big picture, and you have to look at everything in order to get to the truth.
That's a good rasha too.
Right.
That's a good one too. I've seen ideas like that they say that the Chotamo Shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu is emet, that the seal of Hashem is truth, because it's from the beginning to the end, from aleph to taf, aleph, mem, taf. It's from the beginning, middle, end.
Right.
So it's similar to what you're saying.
Right.
So here they're taking a different interpretation. This is the interpretation that the students brought.
It's not only that sheker, it's not stable.
Well, that's the next part. That's going to say next. Yeah. So then he says, why is it that sheker stands on 1 foot? Because shin, kuf, and resh, they all stand on only 1 foot. Whereas truth, ve'emet, malbin liboneh, but what you see that it has a solid footing. The truth is on a solid flat base. Aleph, mem, and taf, they all have 2 legs. So it says kushta ka'eh, shikra lo ka'eh. Because truth will stand the test of time. There might be twisting and turning, but eventually the truth is going to win. Whereas sheker will fall. A little bit of a challenge, you topple it over, and it's all over, and it's not going to rise again, just like something with 1 leg. That's why it has only 1 leg. You can ask Rabbi Vinyas about this issue, because this is why the many people, they didn't like the shin in the Sephardic Sifrei Torah, because the Sephardic Sifrei Torah, the shin is flat on the bottom instead of being pointed. That's one of the most common differences, most noticeable differences between a Sephardic Sifrei Torah and mezuzot and tefillin versus the Ashkenazi ones. And so therefore, they criticized it. So the Sephardic Sofrim said, no, when it says sheker doesn't sit on 2 feet, it doesn't mean each letter like Rashi says. It means the word. Because if you take emet, you make a straight line under it, because aleph, mem, taf. If you take sheker and you make a line, you put shin, kuf, resh, and you try to make a line under it, what's going to happen? Because of the kuf, you're going to have to do this around the bottom, and that's why it's not able to stand, because the whole word will topple over. The whole word will topple over.
Why the Ashkenazis choose the...
Because of this Gemara, that's where they get it from. That it's a point, because it says that they think each letter has to be on a point. Where that's what Rashi says here, so that's how they had it. But the Sephardic way is that no, it's the word is on a point, because the kuf, the leg of the kuf, extends down. I learned that from Rabbi Vinyas many years ago.
Well, that would make sense, because when you're talking about standing, it has to be on the same line. If it's not on the same line, then it doesn't matter that each one of them, because if it was on the same line and it was all 3 pointy, then it would stand.
That's true, but they're not all 3 pointy.
No, right. But
I see what you mean.
Do you understand what I mean? In other words, if everything stood on one line, let's say the kuf, stood on the same line, and it would still stand.
That's true,
because it's 3.
Right, if they're all standing, right? They're all standing like that, but they're not, because the kuf goes down. Okay, so now we say. Now they get to Atbash. Atbash is more complicated because there are different combinations of letters, and Rashi says this is all in Sefer Yetzirah. Some of this has to do with Kabbalah, that the combinations of letters. So now we went through from Aleph through Taf, and we went every letter of the Aleph Bet. What is the symbolic meaning of it, and how does it connect to the letter after it? Okay, now we're getting into Atbash. Atbash is where you take Aleph and Taf, the first and the last. Bet and Shin, the second and the second to last, okay? And so on. Gimel and Resh, the third and the third to last. So this is another way of analyzing or interpreting the letters. So that's what it's going to do now. So Atbash, so don't let anybody tell you this is just a later Kabbalistic thing, that they do that kind of letter manipulation, because they did that even in the Talmud. So Atbash, Oti ta'ev etavelo. These are all statements with a question. Oti ta'ev, Aleph Taf means he hated me, meaning if this person is wicked and he hated God, etavelo, am I going to care about him? That's Hashem speaking. Then he says, what's the next one? Bash is bi lo chashak, he didn't desire me. Shemi yachol alav, should my name rest upon him? So that's the bet and the shin. Bet is bi, and the shin is for Shemi. Gar, Gimel, Resh, what does it stand for? Gufo Timeh, he defiled his body, meaning he sinned. Arachem alav, the Resh is, should I have mercy on him? Dak is Daltoti or Daltotai Na'al, he locked my doors, meaning he didn't come to the Beit Midrash, he didn't worship God. So Karnav Lo Agadea, should I not cut down his horns? So they're taking these two letters and making an interpretation. Adkan midat rishayim. This is interpreting the atbash for wicked people, right? Aleph and Tav, meaning he's bad, so I don't want to have anything to do with him. Aval midat tzadikim atbash. But we can also interpret it positively. Im atabosh. The Aleph is if you are. The atbash is im ata bosh. Okay, if you are humble. Bosh literally means embarrassed, if you're humble. Gar dak. Imata oseken. Gur badok. If you do that, you will live in heaven. Meaning you will have a portion in the world to come. So now they're interpreting this again.
That's not...
What?
It's doing it the same way?
It's doing it the same way, but now it's taking the two units at a time. At and bash is one. Right. Gar and dak is another.
Oh, I see.
Yeah. So now they're interpreting that way. Hatz vaf. So now we have the next two pairs of letters stand for Chatzitza have bincha le'af. Hatz is chatzitza. There will be an interposition between you and af. And anger, meaning punishment that comes to the world, you'll be protected from it. And then you have za chas tan. So these are, again, three pairs of letters. So what does that mean? Ve'enata mizdazea. You won't be shaking min hasatan. From the Satan, from the evil forces in the world that may come to harm you. Yam kol. The next one is Yud Mem Kaf Lamed. Amar Sarshel Gehinom. Yam here means Gehinom, means the bad place that you don't want to go. So the prince of Gehinom, the prince of, I guess this would be the ruler of the devil. I mean, in we don't really have a concept of that, but like it would be the devil in Christian terms. Okay, Lifnei HaKadosh Baruch Hu, before Hashem, Ribono Shel Olam, Master of the world, Layam Kol. I want everyone in Gehinom, the Jews and the non-Jews, everybody down here in the bad place. Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Hashem said, Achas Batagif. Here's another series of letters, and Rashi says that these various combinations are all found in Sefer Yetzirah, in the early Kabbalistic works. What do they stand for? Ani Chas Alehem. That's Achas. Why? Nipnei Sheba'atu Bagif. Because they rejected Gif. Gilui Arayot. They rejected adultery. They had a level of sexual morality. That sexual morality that they had is enough for me not to throw them into Gehinom. This is similar to the Midrash that says that any Jew that goes down to Gehinom, Avraham Avinu is going to sit at the door, and if you had a Brit Milah, he's going to send you out. That you don't have to go in. So there's a certain level of morality and propriety that they had. Dachatz, what's dachatz? Dakimhem, they're pure. Kenimhem, they're honest. Tzadikimhem, they're righteous. So this is Hashem responding to the prince of Gehinom who wants to take all the Jews down there, or all the bad Jews. He says, no, they're still good. There's good in them. So halak, what's halak? En lecha chelek behem. You can't have any portion in the Jews. Marzan shat, what's marzan shat? Amar Gehinom lifnei HaKadosh Baruch Hu, should probably say Amar saroshel Gehinom. That the prince of hell, basically, is what it means. Says to Hashem, Ribono Shel Olam, Master of the world, Mari, my master, Zaneni mizar oshel shet. Support me, feed me. It reminds me a little bit of a Little Shop of Horrors, Feed me from the zar oshel shet, from the seed of Shet, from the Semitic people, meaning from the Jews. Amar Le said to him, no, not Semitic people, that's the zar oshel Shem. I mean from the descendants of Shet, who are the descendants from Adam Arishon. Amar Le al bam ganadas. Here's another series of 4 pairs of letters. What do they stand for? Lehechan olichan. Where am I going to lead them? Legan hadas, to a garden of hadas, of what's the word in English for the hadas again? Myrtles, right? Ha vaf. What's that? Amra gehinom lefnei hakadosh baruch hu ribon shalom ayef anochi. But the Gehinom says to Hashem, there's no one feeding me. I'm very tired. I need some food. You got to send me some victims down here. So Hashem says, Zatz Chak. What does that mean? Halalu zarosh shel Yitzchak. These Jews are the descendants of Yitzchak. You can't have them. But Tar Yeshkat. That means Tar, wait. Yeshli kitot shel ovdei kochavim shani noten lecha. He says, don't worry, I have many groups of ovdei kochavim I'm going to send to you. So these combinations of letters are interpreted as a dialogue between Gehinom that needs some fuel down there for its fires. So wants the Jews to be sent down, and Hashem saying, no, I'm not going to send you the Jews, I will send you the idolaters instead.
But he wants the Jews.
He wants the Jews because they're tastier, and there's more protein, it's more filling, I don't know. So now we turn to Kuf Dalid Amud Bet, the new Mishnah. Hakotev shtei otiyot behelem echad. Now obviously the reason for all of this was because of letters. So we got into the issue of letters, and as I said, there are many halachot about the structure of the letters and how they're supposed to be written that are derived from the previous Gemara. So now the Mishnah says, Hakotev shtei otiyot behelem echad. Somebody writes 2 letters in one lapse of awareness. Chayav. He is liable for writing on Shabbat. Katav b'dio. He wrote it with ink. Basam, basikra, bakumus, bakankantum. We're going to learn these are all different kinds of permanent writing materials. In other words, they are different types of inks that were used or colorings that were used for writing. Anything that leaves a permanent mark. It doesn't matter what it is. Let's say there was a corner of the wall, like right here there's a corner of the wall, and he wrote 1 letter on the western wall and 1 on the northern wall where they touch. Okay, but 1 is on one surface and 1 is on another surface, but they're right next to each other, they're on the corner. Okay, so that still counts. On 2 pages of, they would have this sort of, it wasn't like a notebook because they didn't have notebooks like that, but like a sort of luach, a sort of board book that they would have for a ledger that they would keep, that had hard pages that would have they would keep their records in. So 2 pages next to each other, you wrote on each page, and they're read together. In other words, even though they're on 2 pages, you would read 1 letter right next to the other. So chayav, that's considered writing 2 letters. Hakotev al bisaro chayav. If you write something on your flesh, sometimes people write down a phone number on their hand or something like that. That's still considered writing. Hamisaret al bisaro. What if you carved it into your flesh? Now you're really taking things a little bit too far. You're Charlie Manson or something. You're carving into your flesh. Rabbi Eliezer mechayev. Rabbi Eliezer says that's still considered writing, since writing on your flesh is significant. So carving is just a different way of doing the same thing. Mechayev is chatat. So he's going to tell you that you are chayav chatat. But chachamim potrin, and the rabbis say this is not the normal way of writing. You shouldn't do it, but it's not the normal way of writing, and therefore you're not culpable for violating Shabbat. In that case, katav b'mashkin b'mei perot. If you wrote with liquids, with juice, b'avak derachem, b'avak asofrim, you wrote with the dust of the ground. You wrote with let's say you took dirt from the ground and you wrote with it. Let's say there's some dust from the ink dust that sometimes you see that when you have a sofer, you have a scribe, so there's like dust that's created from the ink, so that you use that dust. These things do not last, so therefore patur, you're exempt, because writing with them is not something. If you have sometimes kids, they'll be like, somebody will spill something on the liquid on the table, and they'll write something out with the liquid, or in the shower or in the bath, the kids will write on the wall of the bath with their finger something. So that's not going to last, so it's not considered permanent writing.
So it's patur but asur.
Patur but asur, yeah.
So is there any relevance?
You wouldn't be.
Is there any relevance difference between patur and chayav in regard to full of
No.
And it would be also in what case?
Oh, you mean would it be? No, I think it would be the same status. It would be the same status.
Patur would be allowed. Matchila, what you would say.
You mean are the rabbinic? You mean when there's a malacha that's prohibited on a chol hamoed
versus Esser or Diraisa? That's what I'm saying.
Right? Is it only? I don't think that they make a distinction. I think anything that you wouldn't do anything that's prohibited on both Shabbat and chol hamoed would be the same parameters. The only thing we don't have on chol hamoed is like muktzeh and things like that. We don't have, But yeah, it's true. So, let's say you wrote with the back of your hand, with your foot, with your mouth. Like there's an artist that, there's artists that do all the kinds of cool stuff. We're not talking about those people. We're talking about just a regular person who does it that way. With your armpit, you put the pen in your armpit. Let's say one letter was written before Shabbat and you just added a letter on. So now there are two letters on the page, but really you only wrote one of them. Nitkaven lechtov chet v'katav shtei zainin. You meant to write a chet, and a chet can be made out of two zainim. So you made two zainim instead of the chet. You didn't link them together. Achat ba'aretz v'achat b'korah. You wrote one on the ground and one on the wall. Katav al bet kotlei abayit al shnei dapei pinkas ve'en negin imzeh. Or you wrote on two different pages. You wrote an aleph on one page and a bet on another page, and they're not next to each other. They're not read together. Or you wrote on two different walls of the house, but instead of it being at a corner where they're right next to each other, you wrote one over there and one over there. So they're not read. They don't combine into one entity is the point. Patur. In all those cases, you're exempt because you have to create two letters. So it can't be that there was already a letter there and you wrote one. And it can't be that you wrote one letter on one wall and one letter on the other wall. You have to make an entity of two letters to make the complete measurement of having done the action of Chilul Shabbat. And they have to be linked. The two letters have to be related to one another. If a person wrote one letter that stands for a word, it's a notarikon. Let's say you decide that the letter mem means 40, like it does in Hebrew. They'll put the letter mem. Let's say the word resh means rabbi, or pei means professor, or something like that. Or Dalet means doctor. So anything that is a notarikon, so you only wrote one letter, but the meaning is more than just the one letter. So Rabbi Yoshua ben Betera mechayev. Rabbi Yoshua ben Betera says that the only reason why two letters is necessary is because that's considered, it gives it some significance. But if the one letter has significance because it means a whole word, it means a whole concept, that could also be significant.
So that's all the letters.
It's only if you intended it. If you intended it, meaning you wrote it, notarikon. So you could say, to me, Dalet means doctor, but the person who wrote it, they just were writing a Dalet. In other words, they meant for it to be that, so it has more significance than, or at least equal significance to when there were two letters. The rabbis exempt you. They say that the number two, in this case having two letters, is the bottom line. It must be at least two letters, and even if your one letter had some greater symbolic meaning, it doesn't remove it from being, it doesn't make it any more significant. It's still just one letter. We're going to see a really, really interesting thing here in a second about the censorship of the Talmud. So hold on. So Dio, first we're going to define the various types of inks that were used in the Mishnah that are considered to be permanent ink. So dio is diota, that's ink. We know what that is. Sam, sama. Sam is referring to a type of yellow, arsenic kind of a coloring that they would use. Sikra, amar Rabba bar Chana, sikreta shema. This is red dye. Okay, so red dye is also considered coloring. Kumus is kuma. So kumus refers to kuma, which Rashi says this means gum Arabic, basically. Kan kantum amar Rabba bar Chana, amar Shmuel, charta de ushkape. That according to Rabba bar Chana, in the name of Shmuel, this is referring to the blackening stuff that was used by shoemakers to blacken shoes. Okay, whatever that was, whatever exactly that was, some kind of, they give some kind of I looked it up, they give some kind of a chemical meaning to it, some kind of exact classification, but I don't know what it was. Anything which is a permanent marking, so it doesn't really matter, these are just examples. Anything that permanently marks is qualifies for writing. So Latri Emai, what does this come to include? Latri Haiditane Rabbi Hananya Kitavo b'meitariya ve'afza kasher. That if you wrote a get, this is talking about writing gitin. A get has a similar requirement, that it has to be written with some kind of a permanent marker. In other words, it has to be written in a way that it can't be erased. So if that's the case, what about if you wrote it with dirty water that makes a permanent mark? Or what if you wrote it with afza, gallnut juice, which was often used to treat parchment but wasn't usually used for writing, and still it's kasher. Tanei Rabbi Chia, ketavo ba'avar, ba'shachor, ba'shichor, kasher. If a person wrote be'avar with lead, what's writing with lead called today?
Writing with what?
Lead.
Oh, with lead?
It's called using a pencil. Okay, so that's what they had. So using a pencil, it's considered writing. Using coal to write, it's considered writing. Using shichor here, according to Rashi, is the same as the blackening agent of the shoemaker that we mentioned before. But the point is that all these things are kasher for a get, and since they're kasher for a get, that means they make a permanent mark. And since they make a permanent mark, that means they are a violation of Shabbat. All right, so now we say as follows. Now we're going to get a really interesting agadah here about Jesus. But hold on. Yeah, I bet you weren't expecting to hear about Jesus today. Okay, when he said him to the Talmud class. So the Tanya, it says in the Braita, it says that somebody who carves words into their flesh, it's a machloket whether it's considered writing or not. Tanya, it says in the Braita, Amar lehen Rabbi Eliezer l'chachamim, Rabbi Eliezer said to the chachamim, v'alo ben sitada, hotzi kishafim mitzrayim. Ben sitada actually smuggled out magic arts from Egypt. What?
Bad name.
Yeah. He smuggled out magical arts from Egypt. And how did he do it? Basrita shal bisaro. He carved the secrets into his arm, and that's how he remembered it. And then he left with these secrets on his arm. Amrulo, they said, shotehaya. He was an idiot. Ve'en mevin raya min hashotim. We don't bring proofs from crazy, foolish people who do crazy things. Now, in the Hagaot V'Tzionim, and you can find this also, the Steinsaltz brings all of the excerpts that were censored out of the Talmud, but I'm lucky enough to have this Gemara here, these red Gemarot that are the Friedman edition, puts everything back in the notes on the side. He keeps the Vilna Shas, but he puts on the notes that what was it? Ben Sidada, that the Gemara asked, who is Ben Sidada? Who is this person? Ben Panderahu. You mean Ben Pandera? And then the Gemara said, no, Bal Sitada, Boel Pandera. That this person's mother, her husband's name was Sitada, but the actual father of the son was Pandera because she was an adulteress. Then the Gemara says, what do you mean? No, her husband was Papus ben Yehuda. Rather, the mother was called Sitada, who was Miriam Magdala. That sounds very much like Mary Magdalene, right? Okay, so as they said in Pumbedita, they call a woman who strays from her husband Satit da mibala. She has strayed, from the word sota. Right? Sota is someone who strays. So Sitada means his mother was an adulteress. Ben Sitada. So there were many. So the Christians saw this and they said, "Who is this Miriam Magdala?" Really, it means a hairdresser or something like that. Okay, but they thought it was talking about Mary Magdalene. Now it happens to be that Mary Magdalene is not even Jesus' mother. That was a different Mary, but that doesn't matter. So they saw this and they're like, oh, they're saying that this guy who was crazy and smuggled magical arts out of Egypt was Jesus. Because they're saying that his mother was Mary and that she was an adulteress. And that was exactly what the Jews said about Mary, that she was an adulteress and that's why she got pregnant and the whole thing. And, so therefore the censors, the Christian censors, took this out of the Gemara because they didn't like the implication that it was about Jesus. However, there's a Tosafot who was also... there was a Rashi and a Tosafot that were also censored out of the Talmud because they commented on this piece and said that, this Ben Sitada was a mamzer, he was born from an adulterous relationship, he wasn't really his father's son and all that. And the Tosafot said that this is not talking about Jesus because the period in which Papus ben Yehuda lived, who was the wrong time. It was the Tosafot said that he lived way before this time, not in the time that this story would have been taking place. Now, that has to do with another problem, which is that the chronology of Jesus' life, as it's understood by the Talmud, is very different than the chronology as it's understood conventionally. The Ramban talks about this in the Disputation, and it's found in other sources, that the Talmud's discussions of Yeshu, who, if we assume that it's really talking about Jesus, place him much earlier than he seems to have actually lived, according to historical reports. So there's a whole question about whether the Jesus that's talked about in the Talmud is even the same person, or it's just a different person who happened to have the same name. So we don't even know. Anyway, but that's another story. The point is that it was censored out of the Talmud, and it appears in the new ones. It has been brought back. I was going to say resurrected, but that would be maybe a bad choice of words. Okay, so katav od echad samuch lichtav. If a person, so we know that you can't write two letters on Shabbat. What if there's already one letter written and you add just another letter? That's not a full violation. So katav od echad samuch lichtav. Mantana amar Rava bar Rav Huna dilak Rabbi Eliezer. This is not the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer. Di Rabbi Eliezer amar achat ala rig chayav. That according to Rabbi Eliezer, if you add even one stitch to an already woven garment, you are chayav. In other words, according to Rabbi Eliezer, the measurements that we have are when you're starting from scratch. But if there's already an existing entity and you add even one piece, you contributed to it. So if you're weaving, you have to put 2 stitches. But if you're adding just one string on to a garment that already exists, it's already significant because the garment already exists. You're not starting from scratch. He would say the same thing here, that if you already had a letter written down and you added one letter, let's say there was a word that required an S at the end and you added the S, so that would be considered significant according to Rabbi Eliezer, but we don't say that. We say you have to write the entire 2 letters to have violated Shabbat. Katav al gabei katav. Let's say there's something written and you write over it. Okay, somebody wrote a word, and you just traced over the word. So we said that you're not chayav. You're not liable for violating Shabbat because you didn't create anything new. You just traced over the existent lettering. So Mantana, who is the one who taught this? Amar Rav Chisda said like Rabbi Yehuda. This is not Rabbi Yehuda. I know that. The Tanya says in the Braita, Harishas hayat tzarich lichtov et Hashem v'nitkaven lichtov Yehuda v'ta'a v'lo itil bo dalet ma'avir alav kol musu makadeshot devar Rabbi Yehuda. This is a very unusual case. A person, and this is going to show you that according to Rabbi Yehuda, contrary to our Mishnah, according to Rabbi Yehuda, even if you write over something, it's already written. Let's say it says the word hello, and you write the H over the H, you just darken it, right? And you write E over the E, and L over the L, and L over the L, and O. So the case is, somebody's writing a Sefer Torah, and they come up to Hashem's name. Now, when you write Hashem's name in the Sefer Torah, you have to have specifically in mind L'Shem Kiddushat Hashem. You must have in mind that this is being done for the holiness to be sanctified as Hashem's name. And if you just write the letters Yud and Hey and Vav and Hey, or any other name of God, or Aleph, Lamed, Hey, Yud, Mem, any name of God, without saying L'Shem Kiddushat Hashem, it's no good. Even though the letters are right, it's no good. And you can't erase it. So you got a big problem. So what happened here in this case? The problem here in this case is that Rabbi Yehuda is talking about is the person was supposed to write Hashem's name, but he thought he was supposed to write the name Yehuda, which only differs from God's name by 1 letter. Dalet, right? So he put Yud, he put Hey, he put Vav, and he thought he was writing the word Yehuda, but he skipped the Dalet, he ended up writing another Hey. So actually, he was supposed to write Hashem's name, and he did write Hashem's name, but in his mind he wanted to write Yehuda. So he didn't have in mind for the holiness of the name. So Rabbi Yehuda says, trace over the letters again, and this time have in mind that you are sanctifying it. So he says, that's why literally what he says is pass the kulmus, pass the pen over it and sanctify it. So rewrite it over those letters. In other words, you just darken them, having in mind that this time you're sanctifying it. So wouldn't he say the same thing on Shabbat? That if you already have something written, obviously he considers that writing. To write over something again and darken it is considered writing according to Rabbi Yehuda. The Chachamim say, this is not good. This name is not min hamuvchar. It's pasul. It darkens it and makes it darker than all the other letters on the page. Therefore it's not acceptable, and therefore you have to hide away the Sefer Torah. It has to go in Geniza. You can't erase the name of Hashem that you put, but you cannot use the Sefer Torah. It is not kasher. So what do you see? That according to Rabbi Yehuda, writing over something that's already written, in other words, tracing the exact same letters, is also considered writing. Not like our Mishnah. So it's a machloket. Tana, it says in the Tosefta, Katav otachat vishlim ala sefer aragchu techat vishlim ala beged chayav. If, let's say, you are writing a Sefer Torah, and on Friday you were just about to finish it. You wrote Le'enei Kol Yisrael. Yisrael is the last word of the Torah. But you wrote Yud, Sin, Resh, Aleph, and you said, it's time for Shabbat, I gotta go. I don't have time to do it. So you went for Shabbat and everything. You have 1 letter left. And on Shabbat, you forgot it was Shabbat, and you put that last Lamed. So how many letters did you write on Shabbat? Only 1, so it shouldn't be anything. But Hishlima LaSefer, you finished an entire sefer with that 1 letter. that letter is very significant. It's not just one letter, it's the completion of all Sefer. So because it's the completion of all Sefer, therefore it's significant and you are Chayab. Similarly, it says, Arag chut echad. If you weave only one string, only one thread, V'hishlima lebeged, but you're completing a garment, there was just one thread left of the garment that needed to be done. So even though normally you have to thread two to be Chayav, in this case, since you're completing the beged, we're saying that it has significance and you would be Chayav.
That wouldn't be part of Makeba Patish. In other words, that wouldn't be, because that sounds like it's a Makeba Patish.
The last pulling maybe that you do or something like that.
Rather than...
Could also be. So, yeah. Is Sefer Torah kosher if you did that? It's a good question. If you did it b'shogeg, yeah, possibly. Yeah.
If the thread you're putting on is to prevent the garment, part of the garment from ripping on Shabbat.
So it's added.
You're doing it. You're doing it to prevent a inadvertent ripping of whatever might be the.
Well, if you're actually weaving it in, you wouldn't be allowed to do it. If you're just like tying it in some way to prevent it, that might be okay. Yeah, that might be okay. Yeah. So he says. So the Gemara first says, Amantana. Who is the opinion that says that if you write one letter and you complete a book, that you're liable? This must be like what we said before. Amar Rava bar Ravuna, Rabbi Eliezer the Amar Achat al Harig Chayav. This must be Rabbi Eliezer, because remember Rabbi Eliezer said that if you already have woven a garment, you're working on it already, then even one thread added is significant. We only say two threads when you're starting from scratch, according to Rabbi Eliezer. So too here, he's saying that one letter can be significant. One thread sewn can be significant. But Rav Ashi says, Afilu tema Rabbanan lahashlim shani. That even according to the rabbis, who normally would say that if you're in the middle of writing the Sefer Torah, you need to write two letters for it to be significant. If you're in the middle of weaving a garment, you need to write two letters. Not like Rabbi Eliezer, who would say that even one is significant if you're in the middle of working. Okay? But when you're finishing it off, you're completing it, there, even one letter, even one thread is going to be significant, because through that thread you basically did everything. You brought everything together. Through that one letter you basically made the Sefer Torah a kasher Sefer Torah. So it has a greater significance than you would think, and that's actually what the halacha is. Rav Ami says, "Katav od achat b'taveria v'achat b'tzipori chayav." If you wrote one letter in Tzipori, you were in Tzipori in the beginning of Shabbat, and then later in the day you were in Tiveria, or vice versa. One is in Tiveria, one is in Tzipori. So you're still chayav, because even though you wrote it on two different pieces of paper, you could put them together and you'll have two letters. So what's the problem? So the Gemara asks, wait a second. But we said that Vatanan katav al shnei kotlei habayit ve'al shnei dapei pinkas ve'negin zeim ze patur. We said that if you write letters on two different walls of the house, or you write letters on two different boards in your ledger, that if they're not read together, then it's not considered two letters. So hachala mechusar maaseh dikreva. He said, I'm sorry, I skipped a part. That hatam mechusar maaseh dikreva. Hachala mechusar maaseh dikreva. Over there, you need a greater action to bring about the connection of the two letters, like Rashi says here. If you want the two walls of the house to be together, you're going to have to cut a board out of the wall and put them together. You're going to have to cut a board out of this ledger and put the two pieces of the ledger together. But here we're talking about writing on the end of one piece of paper a letter, and on the other end of another piece of paper, and you could just hold them together and that would be enough. So writing the two letters, if they can be held together, just simply held together and made two letters can be made out of them, that's enough. But your wall, you're going to have to tear down the wall. If you wrote a letter on that wall and a letter on this wall, you wrote graffiti, one letter over there, one letter over there, you're going to have to tear down the walls to put them together, for them to be read together. So that's a different story. So Tana the Tosefta says, if you fixed one letter, and Rashi says, what is higya otachat? Oh, it means that if you fixed a sefer, if you fixed a sefer Torah, one letter, you fixed it. Or you fixed any of the kafdalid sfarim, really, it would be the same, because Rashi says you're not allowed to keep a sefer she'eno muga. You're not allowed to keep a book, a sefer Torah, or even sifrei nevi'im, really, you shouldn't keep them if they're not properly corrected. Okay? We mostly apply that to a sefer Torah, but it could be other sfarim as well. So he says that even if you fixed one letter, you're chayav. So the Gemara asks, Hashta katav otachat patur, hegiot otachat chayav. This doesn't make any sense. If you wrote only one letter in the middle of a Sefer Torah, we would say that you didn't do anything. So how could fixing one letter be something? That doesn't make any sense. You didn't even write one, let alone two. You have to write two to be chayav. So the Gemara says, so Amar Rav Sheshet says that what we're talking about here is what kind of repair did you do? There was the word, let's say mizuzot, has two zayinim next to each other, and they were blended into a chet. Accidentally, the person wrote a chet instead of a zayin. So what did you do? Your fixing was you cut the chet and you made two zayinim. So you actually made two letters. Your correction was a making of two letters out of one, and because you made two letters, you are liable. So one second. So then the Gemara goes on and says, wait, Rava Amar, Kegon Shinitol Tagoshel Dalet, Vasoresh. So even if all you did was you took away the tag of the dalet and made it a resh. You took away the part that sticks out, because a resh and a dalet are very similar except for the piece that sticks out. So if you removed it and you made it a resh, so what Rashi explains, what is Rava saying though? How is Rava explaining it? Because we asked the problem, right, that you have to make two letters to be chayav. So the first opinion, Rav Sheshet says you're making two letters, because what did you do? You actually cut one letter into two, so you made two letters, and that's why you're liable on Shabbat. But fixing one letter, you wouldn't be liable. But Rava comes along and says, no, even if you just made the dalet into a resh, that's also fixing. Or I guess if you made the resh into a dalet, it would be the same. So, but he doesn't explain, how does he answer the problem? But isn't that only making one letter? How's that making two letters? So Rashi explains that really it's a case of, as I mentioned the other day, ha'ikar chaser min hasefer, that the main point is kind of missing from the text. Because what's the idea here? Because you fixed the Sefer Torah. In other words, we're assuming this is a complete Sefer Torah. You're fixing it. So remember, we said that everyone agrees that if you add the last letter, if it's the last letter of a Sefer Torah, that it's considered significant. So too here, since you're not allowed to keep a non-kosher Sefer Torah, and as long as one letter is damaged or wrong, it's not kosher. So by changing this one letter, even though all you're fixing is one letter, you're transforming the entire Sefer Torah to be a kasher one. So that's why it's considered a significant action, even just to turn the dalet into a resh, because it's a completed Sefer Torah that you're fixing just one letter. Yes?
So say you Sefer Torah had 2 errors.
Right. Mm-hmm.
You fixed, which means 2 words were
wrong. We're no good.
Wrong,
right.
But you fixed one of the letters, thus you created the word. Would that be enough?
So there, that's a good example. Right, that's a good example. So there you would need, let's say you had multiple errors.
Right.
So the inference we can make here from the Rashi is that fixing only one of them would not be enough. Because normally you have to write 2 letters to be liable for violating Shabbat. The only reason we're going to say that fixing one letter is significant is when that fixing actually repairs the entire thing. But it repairs the word, but it doesn't repair the whole Sefer Torah. Right. Right.
But what about creating the word? If the letter is wrong, and the word is obviously it has no value. Right. But if you fix, whether it's in a Sefer Torah or a Sefer, if you fix the letter, you create a word.
That's true. So that's similar to the case in the Mishnah that we had before, that if you had already something written and you just add a letter on the end, let's say, to complete the word, you're still not liable, because the extent of involvement was limited. It was only limited to that one letter. So it's true, you fixed the word by fixing the letter, but the amount of writing that you did was only that one letter being fixed. Whereas when you qualify the entire Sefer Torah, it's still pasul until that's the only error that there is. But I hear what you're saying.
So the example of the 2 zayin is confusing because it leads you to believe.
Well, that was Rav Sheshet's solution, though. Right. Rav Sheshet was actually giving that as a solution first. His opinion was, no, if you fix only one letter, it's not enough. You got to make 2 letters. So Rava said, no. Even if you make only one letter, but you're fixing the entire Sefer, so it's just like completing a Sefer Torah. So now, just this one last point. Tana, we learned in the Tosefta that Gaven lechtov ot achat ve'alu biyado shetayim chayav. That if you intended to write one letter and accidentally you wrote 2. So let's say you want to write a chet and instead you wrote 2 zayinim and you didn't connect them. So it says chayav. You made 2 letters. So you're chayav. So the Gemara says, what do you mean vatnan patur? Didn't we learn that you're exempt So now, obviously, there's a different problem here, which is you didn't do what you intended to do. So why are you even liable at all? Okay, that's it. That's it. So Tosafot deals with that problem and says basically that it means that you were willing to write whatever you wrote. You didn't have a specific intention. You just wanted to write. You wanted to write one letter. You ended up writing two. You said, "Whatever I write," and that's what came out. So you're still liable for your action, even though it wasn't exactly what you intended. But look, that in a case, basically, ziyuneh means it refers to the tagim on the letters. That writing, if you write in a Sefer Torah a letter, but you didn't complete it because it requires the tagim, so you wouldn't be liable yet because you didn't complete the writing of the letters, because it doesn't have those special crowns that go on. Certain letters have those crowns that go on top. So even though you wrote two letters, you wrote two zayinim. In this case, instead of a chet, you wrote two zayinim, but the zayin is one of the letters that requires crowns. So since you didn't draw the crowns on top, it's not considered that you completed the letter yet in that case, because you would still need to add that enhancement before the letters were fully done. So we see that although in normal writing you wouldn't need to write a crown on top of your zayin for it to count, since you're writing in a Sefer Torah, you would not be considered to have written the letters until they're fully formed, which means including the tagim, including the crowns that are added as well.